company or our advertisers.
With us tonight here in the studio, Morehead City Councilman Mark Hintermeyer. About 9 months ago, Morehead said, hey, we're going to put a study out there to find out why is there no restaurants showing up in Morehead. How's that going so far?
Well, good. A couple comments I would make. We have a lot of good restaurants in Morehead.
But there's not a lot of them.
Yeah, I hear you. The ones that are there are excellent restaurants. So I would want to first work on that caveat. However, the issue is the study that we're trying to do to see what the disparity is between what restaurants in North Dakota, the rules they play by, and then the restaurants in Minnesota and what they play by. And there are some differences. And we're hoping to find what those out so that we can react to them.
But you also are kind of saying, hey, Chris, wait a second here. I'm defending the restaurants in Morehead.
Yes. So
why then even have a study? If you're saying, hey, we've got enough restaurants in Morehead, we're good, then why spend $10,000 of the taxpayers' money to do a study to find out how we can automate restaurants?
No, good question. The reason is we don't think we have enough. We're a city of 40,000. And I think some of it is when you talk to the restaurant owners, there is an understanding of a disparity because of the term tip credit that's appropriate in North Dakota that Minnesota does not. We're one of 7 states that don't have an accommodation for restaurants. And I think that we can improve the climate so that more businesses and more restaurants can come to Morehead. And we'll use the border cities legislation. We've done that quite effectively on some other issues. And my purpose is to explore this in a conceptual nature to understand the facts so that we can move forward on this.
So I guess the question for you, and I got a quote here. It says, this is from Randy Thorson, co-owner of JL Beer, says, we've got people who would rather work on the Fargo side and take less wages because the tips are higher because we do more volume. He says, hey, it's just too costly to do business in Morehead. It's easier for restaurants to stay in Fargo. Does these quotes then ultimately justify the North Dakota Chamber's sign, hey, we're open for business?
Yeah, good question. That, as I think about your question, that reverberates on a couple different levels. Obviously, St. Paul does what they want to do in the legislature. And here we are sitting in Morehead, a community of about 40,000 people, 1 chamber, 1 metro area. And, you know, I would attempt to, I guess, weigh in on the notion that volume will be in Morehead and that a city of 40,000 on the grow, that they will have the volume, so that part of that quote would go away. And then in that context, I think the employee makes a better wage. And my initiative is to try to then, through that border cities legislation, is cut the restaurant a break through a credit or an exemption so that we can compete on that level to kind of balance that tip credit issue between North Dakota and Minnesota. But having said that, you know, I spoke with a restaurant, a national chain in Fargo. I said, when are you going to open a store up in Morehead? He says, oh, I wouldn't because all my employees would want to work in Morehead. So it goes both ways. I think there's a different view on that in some sense. And this national chain, I was surprised because I was out eating with some friends. I was surprised that it was such a quick response, that they had actually thought through that they would have to put a moratorium, I think he said like 2 years, we'd have to put a moratorium on our employees not being able to go to that restaurant or we'd lose all of them.
But Randy Thorson's saying, no, that my people are making at least as much, if not more, in Fargo, surely because of obviously the volume. And you're saying that the national chains go, no, my people want to work there because maybe it's a more steady income because of the minimum wage?
It's more income, and then I would argue that in that equation with that quote is the volume. And from my standpoint, if you have the volume, you're going to also be able to pay your workers more. It's not going to be that much of a burden. But I would like to step in and help that business retain more of their money through a credit or an exemption if I'm successful.
What is as well is that there's not a lot of businesses raising their hands for this study.
Right.
Why not?
You know, that's a good question. And from my standpoint, I think there's a couple reasons. One is government getting involved. They don't want to open their books to government. And I would not let that be the...
It's a shocker after NSA.
Yeah, really. I understand that. And we have a third party doing it, so we're trying to be sensitive to that. But I would argue that this is not the big pole in this tent. What we want to do is identify an option through the border cities legislation to improve the situation there. We have to get to a number, and that's for the legislative language. So is it $1.50? Is it $2.25? Whatever we're going to get to, we'll get to that.
Let me ask you this, because when you and I talked about the North Dakota Open for Business billboard, I said, look, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. I think you should be screaming at St. Paul, not Andy Peterson. Does St. Paul sort of treat Moorhead and maybe East Grand Forks and Breckenridge as the redheaded stepchild?
You know, I would broaden that. From my point of view, we're members of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. I think the Greater Minnesota is in the same pot. You know, we're on the stove boiling there, and the metro area goes about their business.
So maybe a better question, is St. Paul failing the greater cities of Minnesota?
My view is that their, I don't want to be sensitive here, but their frame of reference is the metro area, and the greater Minnesota, we have to scrap for an understanding through our legislators that what's good for greater Minnesota is good for Minnesota as a whole, and then compete. But the 5 border cities have a unique relationship that they've accommodated that in other areas, and my hope is to be very aggressive in improving in other areas that we need to, and this is one area that I hope to be successful into the future here. So.
Mark, always great to have you here.
I appreciate being on. Thank you.
Frank and open.
Thank you.
Stay with us, talking about restaurants and tip credits. What's tipping etiquette? There's been a big conversation as of late as, hey, should it be 15%, 20%? Should we just throw it in the bill? We're going to get your thoughts. We went out and got some man on the street sound bites as well. So stay with us. As always, be sure and join our conversation. Go to our website, 630pov.com. We'll be right back.